Again, our monthly meeting, 7:45, the second Thursday of the month. They're right here in City Hall. The public is invited to attend, and we would love to enlist some of you as volunteers to bring your passion projects to the table. Again, the city website, the Facebook page, and we would love if you're active on Facebook, if you would friend us on Facebook. Our social media outreach is there. We work on it. It's getting stronger, we hope. This is a nice screenshot for the City of Dunwoody website, and it shows you where you go. I think you had some of this on here, and I don't see it right now, the directions. Do you recall? How do you back up? All right. So if you go to the website, it's easy to get confused. Departments, Community Development, Sustainability Commission, and you're there. This is what our Facebook page looks like. So again, we thank you for being here. We hope we all get a lot of knowledge and understanding about stream buffers, what they do, what they don't do, and how the choices that we make impact the future. Thanks so much.
This is Rich.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Joe. Again, my name is Rich Edinger. I'm the city engineer. Sorry. My name is Rich Edinger. I'm the city engineer for the city of Dunwoody. And this is a presentation that I made to the city council on June 11th as a result of a text amendment that was initiated by one of the city council members to have a discussion essentially about the stream buffer process and what exactly Dunwoody's code said and how it was being implemented. And so the objectives of the presentation were essentially an overview of where we've been, why, and how we got where we are. Sort of an issue identification, what staff saw as some of the issues with the stream buffer ordinance, the code language, and the issues perhaps that code language gave rise to. And then we had a series of key questions for the city council to answer to give staff direction on where to go next. And namely, those are essentially four things. Does the council agree with having multiple stream definitions, which I'll talk about in a minute? Does council generally support the alignment of Dunwoody's ordinance with the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District's model ordinance? Should any changes, as we've discussed in the presentation, occur prior to or in conjunction with the city's zoning code rewrite? Because the city currently is rewriting its zoning code. And then basically looking for clarification on next steps. So with that, I'll start with the overview of exactly what is a stream buffer. Well, on the EPA's website, a stream buffer is an area along a shoreline, a wetland, or a stream where development is restricted or prohibited, and that's sometimes called a riparian buffer. You can see the graphic. We have a stream, that buffer area, and then the upland area. And so the question then sort of begs the question, why restrict development in these areas? And what essentially is that development negatively impacts our surface water quality. And pollutants attach themselves to sediment, which is washed from developed impervious surfaces into streams. And then as a result of that development, changes the hydrology of a watershed, and then that also alters the morphology or the shape of the streams. Streams tend to be constantly evolving based on they react essentially to runoff and the type of runoff and the hydrology of the watershed. And then as a result of that, aquatic life is impacted. Okay. So in the graphic at the bottom of the screen, essentially on the left-hand side, you'll see a typical stream channel prior to development. And then as development in a watershed occurs, the stream responds by first down cutting, and then it gets wider and the banks get relatively steep. And then eventually the stream reaches a new point of equilibrium some years later. So what is Dunwoody's current situation? Well, and when I talk about the city's stream buffer ordinance, there are several stream buffer ordinances that the city has. This particular ordinance is a result of the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District's promulgation of a model ordinance, which was done some years ago, the city has the option of being more restrictive than the model in this regard. I think Frank in a minute is going to talk about the state waters buffer, which is a result of the city's erosion and sediment control ordinance, which is largely driven by a mandate by the state if we want to be a local issuing authority. So we're talking about a stream buffer that is mandated by the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District. It's typically a 75-foot buffer or a 50-foot buffer with a 25-foot setback. But with that, let me talk about Dunwoody's specific situation. The stream buffer ordinance that Dunwoody currently has was essentially adopted from DeKalb County's code. And there have been some modifications over the last several years by previous city council. The current ordinance is more restrictive than the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District model ordinance, which it can be. So in Dunwoody, most residential subdivisions were built prior to this stream buffer ordinance being in effect. And so as a result of that, there are many houses that are really already located in the buffer. And these are essentially legal non-conforming uses. Generally, in the R100 zoning district, you have some relatively small lots and with limited opportunity for people to expand their homes. And so the result has been, because of the way Dunwoody defines stream, the result has been that multiple variance applications have come before the Zoning Board of Appeals. There's been about 23 between July of 2009 and the present. Okay, so how is Dunwoody's ordinance more restrictive? Well, the city has a 75-foot no encroachment buffer. The Metro North Georgia Water Planning District's model ordinance is a 50-foot no encroachment buffer and a 25-foot impervious setback. All right, so that's the first that's the first way in which it's more restrictive. Secondly, and I think maybe more importantly, is the definition of stream. Dunwoody's definition includes all ditches regardless of their size or groundwater influence. Okay? And the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District's model says that streams begin at the point in the channel that drains 25 acres or where groundwater intersects the surface. And it's been my experience over the years that 25-acre drainage area is usually a large enough area for the channel to be influenced by groundwater at least sometime during the year. And so knowing that, knowing these issues of the fact that there's a lot of variance applications and Dunwoody has a more restrictive ordinance, the question I guess the staff has for the city council is, do you want to continue with this or do you want to look at some other options? Now, city council asked us, we want to take a look at some other options. So one of the things that staff put together was some additional definitions with the idea that we would exempt those streams that do not have any groundwater influence to them. And so right now, we're talking with the City Council about the possibility of making 3 additional definitions, one for perennial stream, one for intermittent stream, and one for ephemeral stream. And then changing the stream definition to exclude ephemeral streams so that we would only put buffers on perennial and intermittent streams which have groundwater influence and which typically support some kind of aquatic life. Right. So one of the definitions for perennial streams that we talked about with the City Council was that perennial stream would mean a well-defined channel that contains water year-round during a year of normal rainfall, with the aquatic bed located below the water table for most of the year. And groundwater would be the primary source of water for a perennial stream, but it also carries stormwater runoff. And a perennial stream typically exhibits biological, hydrological, and physical characteristics commonly associated with a continuous conveyance of water. So if I had to give you a picture of what a perennial stream would look like, this would be a pretty typical perennial stream. This is a stream. It's in Dunwoody. Can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it is a named stream. It's got water year-round. It supports fish and aquatic life. Intermittent stream would mean a well-defined channel that contains water for only part of the year, typically during the winter and spring when the aquatic bed is below the seasonally high water table. Water tables fluctuate based on the season, and some of the time if they intersect the ground, that will create an intermittent stream. All right, so the flow may be heavily supplemented by stormwater runoff, and an intermittent stream often lacks the biological and hydrological characteristics commonly associated with the conveyance of water, but not always. And this is sort of a typical picture of an intermittent stream. This stream may be dry sometimes during the year, it may be wet at other times, and when it's wet, it's not flowing merely in response to a stormwater event or a rain event. And so this is Hidden Branch Circle. All these pictures are, with the exception of the first one, are pictures of stream buffer variance applications the City Zoning Board of Appeals has addressed at some point. All right, that leads me to ephemeral stream. An ephemeral or stormwater stream means a feature that carries only stormwater in direct response to precipitation, with water flowing only during and shortly after large precipitation events. An ephemeral stream may or may not have a well-defined channel, and the aquatic bed is always above the water table, and stormwater runoff is the primary source of water. Ephemeral streams typically lack the biological, hydrological, and physical characteristics commonly associated with the continuous or intermittent conveyance of water. So a picture of an ephemeral stream would be similar to, a ditch in your backyard that is essentially collecting water, maybe from a stormwater pipe that's draining the street, something like that. This is on Summerfield Drive. This was also the subject of a stream buffer variance request. Okay, and then finally, if we do pursue these other definitions of stream, we would recommend changing the definition of stream to the following. For Dunwoody, stream would mean a well-defined channel that contains water year-round during a year of normal rainfall, with the aquatic bed located below the water table for most of the year, commonly referred to as a perennial stream, or that contains water for only part of the year, typically during winter and spring when the aquatic bed is below the seasonally high water table, commonly referred to as an intermittent stream. Ephemeral streams would not be included in this definition. And then finally, the City of Dunwoody may require field studies to verify the existence of the stream. So that brings me back to the objectives of the presentation. We talked about why we're here. We're having this conversation. The community's having this conversation about what is the appropriate level of regulation of the city streams. There's sort of a balancing act between environmental protection and also allowing people to develop their property without sort of undue influence from or undue regulations from the government. Dunwoody has an opportunity to really decide where they want to fall on that. And there's boundaries to that. We can't be less restrictive than the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District. On the other hand, we can be more restrictive. So, the question really is, and staff's looking for direction on this from the council. How restrictive should we be? Should we go back to the model ordinance and be only as restrictive as that, or should we have some additional layer of or additional level of environmental protection? And so what I can tell you is that the feedback the council has given us thus far has been that they are generally, I think, supportive of the idea that we should have a definition of ephemeral stream, and we should probably not regulate streams that don't support aquatic life, that don't have a groundwater influence to them. They also have indicated that they would like this process to be part of the zoning code rewrite. That there's no reason to take it out of that process and make it a special text amendment to the code. And then as far as the next steps go, the direction that we have currently is we're going to continue to gather input, and I think this meeting is a really good one for that. We try to get more input from the public about where they fall on this issue, and then we'll incorporate that into the zoning code rewrite, and it'll be part of that process. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rich. So the next presentation is by Frank Carubba. Thank you. Frank is with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, and let me get you started up there. And one moment. Oh yeah. So, and Frank, when you go ahead, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background to the folks, I'd appreciate that.
My name is Frank Carubba, and I'm with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. And what I'm going to be talking about is the state water determinations, stream buffers, and variances. And this is based on the Georgia Erosion and Sedimentation Act. This is a law that's been in place since 1975. Is it better now? Okay. Under the Georgia Erosion Sedimentation Act, as well as the City of Dunwoody's Code of Ordinance, Chapter 14, the Land Development and Environmental Protection, state waters is defined. That is a different ordinance than what Rich was talking about. So under this ordinance and under the E&S Act, state waters is defined to include any and all rivers, streams, creeks, branches, lakes, reservoirs, ponds, drainage systems, springs, wells, and any other bodies of water, surface or subsurface, natural or artificial, lying within the boundaries of the state, which are not confined on one property. So this includes wetlands, ditches, streams, lakes, ponds, reservoirs. These are all state waters, but not all of these state waters will have buffer requirements. One of the things that the city has done, the city has adopted the model ordinance that we developed for the Georgia Erosion Sedimentation Act. And when the city adopted this ordinance, it has now authorized the city to issue land disturbing activity permits for construction activities. It also makes the city responsible for confirming where state waters are located and if there are any buffer requirements. If a citizen within the city of Dunwoody has to encroach on the state mandated buffer, they will need to contact the city, and as part of their buffer variance application to the city is going to go out to the site, identify the state waters, identify the state mandated buffers, which are 25 feet, and identify whether or not a buffer variance is required for the project. Now, there are going to be some projects that are exempt from the city's ordinance, and they're going to be regulated by EPD, the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. Under those circumstances, EPD is going to be responsible for state water determinations, buffer delineations, and any enforcement activities. Examples of this is if someone was building a public drinking water reservoir, or a Georgia DOT project, or a project that's initiated by a public utility. Those are going to be projects that are regulated by EPD, the state. We're going to be responsible for reviewing the plans, conducting the complaint investigations, and initiating any enforcement actions. At the back, I left copies of this laminated copy of the field guide that we use for determining the presence of state waters that require a buffer. You can take as many copies as you want. If you want additional copies, I have my contact information and I'll be happy to send them to you. It's also available on our EPD website. Inside this document, we identified 3 types of streams, the ones that Rich spoke about: perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral. The definitions that Rich used match the definitions that we have in our field guide here. If you have groundwater, as Rich mentioned, the stream is either going to be perennial or intermittent. And under the state law, it's going to have a buffer, a 25-foot buffer. If the feature is dry, it may be an intermittent stream, or it may be an ephemeral drainage feature. Generally, if there is no flow in that drainage feature after a major rain event within 48 hours, it's most probably ephemeral. But again, we're going to be using this field guide to make that determination on that distinction. And when we're trying to determine whether it's perennial or intermittent, we're looking to see, is there a well-defined channel or a point of rested vegetation? And that vegetation is going to be rested from the channel by normal stream flow or wave action. As per the State E&S Act and the county's ordinance chapter 14, for these particular buffers, we're going to measure it from the point where the vegetation has been rested by normal stream flow or wave action, or from the point of a normal pool elevation that you may have on a pond, a lake, or a reservoir. As you can see in the diagram here, we're going to be talking about a 25-foot buffer, and it's going to be from the point of rested vegetation. That's going to be measured horizontally. Under the State E&S Act and the county's Chapter 14 ordinance, for non-trout streams, that's warm water streams, you have a 25-foot buffer on all perennial and intermittent streams. If it's a warm water stream, there are no buffer requirements for ephemeral drainage features. However, for trout streams, you have a 50-foot buffer on perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral. And it's important to note that you can also have a 25-foot buffer or a 50-foot buffer on ponds, lakes, and reservoirs. This buffer, again, is defined in the Georgia Erosion Sedimentation Act. It's also defined in the state general permits for stormwater discharges from construction activities, as well as Dunwoody's Land Development and Environmental Protection Ordinance. This buffer is not the same as the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District buffer. It's a different buffer. It's defined different. It's measured differently. Under the E&S Act, we do have some exemptions. Water and sewer line crossings do not need a buffer variance from EPD. Drainage structures on warm water streams do not need to get a buffer variance from EPD. Neither do roadway drainage structures, fences for infrastructure projects, the construction of public water system reservoirs, or if someone's building a bulkhead or a seawall on Lake Sinclair and Lake Oconee. These exemptions are defined in the State E&S Act. If someone wants to or needs to encroach in the buffer to build something, if you want to build, let's say, a dock or you want to have a pathway, nature pathway going through the buffer, you will need to get a buffer variance from the EPD first. And that buffer variance will only be issued by the EPD director. It will always be in writing, and it will never be a verbal one. In the back, I have a copy of the most current buffer variance application. This is available on our website, as well as the rules and regs. But we have 11 criteria for which someone can apply for a buffer variance application from EPD. Also, I have a list of guidance documents in the back that are available on the EPD website. They include mitigation guidance, stream bank shoreline stabilization guidance, as well as other ENS or erosion and sedimentation control issues. And again, these are all available on our website. If somebody does encroach on the buffer, the 25-foot buffer, which you're going to have in the city of Dunwoody limits, and they did not get approval from EPD prior, the city, as the enforcing agent, would issue an immediate stop work order. If someone was building a subdivision and the contractor, the developers encroached on the buffer, did not have a buffer variance, as the local issuing authority, the city would issue an immediate stop work order. All construction activities at that construction site would stop. And that stop work order remains in effect until a corrective action's been completed or some mitigation. And when they shut down the site, they're shutting down everything other than the installation or maintenance of best management practices. If someone encroaches on the buffer and does not get EPD approval, and they could have got a buffer variance, let's say it's a homeowner who was not aware that there was a 25-foot buffer and they installed the structure in the buffer and they didn't get a buffer variance. They didn't know. If they could have gotten the buffer variance, if they had applied for one, then EPD would get involved. We would issue a consent order, but there would be some punitive mitigation. If there is no criteria, there's nothing that's applicable, the city would require the individual to remove the structures and restore that buffer, restore it back to its natural state. Here's my contact information. If anybody has any questions or needs to get copies of any documents, please call me or email me, and I'll be happy to give you whatever you need. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Jason Ulseth. He's with the Upper Chattahoochee Riverkeepers, and I'll let Jason introduce himself, and he's going to give some more information about the importance of stream buffers.
Good evening. My name is Jason Ulseth. I'm the Technical Programs Director at Chattahoochee Riverkeeper. Chattahoochee Riverkeeper is an environmental advocacy organization dedicated to the protection and advocacy of the Chattahoochee River and its tributaries, starting north of Helen and all the way down to the Florida border. We recently extended our jurisdiction. And this evening I wanted to talk a little bit about why we have stream buffers. Why is everybody in this room this evening talking about stream buffers? I think it's important that when we're making decisions about the management of our water resources, we have a clear understanding about what it is that a stream buffer does. Why is it special and why do we want to protect it? So my presentation, I don't have a lot of long definitions or legalese. It's just a bunch of pretty pictures that we can look at about what's good about a stream buffer and what bad can happen when we don't protect the stream buffer, when we cut it all down and we have a big storm. What's going to happen? And the past presentations talked about, what is a stream buffer? It's a vegetated strip, basically, that is filtering stormwater as it comes off of whatever land use we have. If it's a parking lot, if it's a rooftop, if it's your driveway, pollutants accumulate on land surfaces, and they don't make their way into our rivers, our streams, and our lakes until it rains. And what we have to think about is what is between that parking lot and the stream. What is going to filter out all of those pollutants, the oils, the metals, the sediments that are accumulating on a parking lot or roadway, whatever it happens to be, and what is going to be there as our line of defense before it makes it into our waterway. And the number one practice, the number one, what we call a BMP, or best management practice, that we have as our best line of defense is stream buffers. They are extremely effective at filtering stormwater runoff, protecting pollutants, and they have a lot of very key ecological functions in terms of what they do for the stream itself. So one thing they do is they reduce the stormwater runoff velocity. So we think about how fast is that stormwater making its way into the stream. And the faster it goes, the more erosive it's going to be, and the more potential it has for eroding out the stream channels. And we'll talk about why that's important, why we don't want our stream channels eroding. And mainly it's because it dumps more sediment into the stream that has a lot of environmental and economic impacts. But not only does it slow the water down, but it filters water, and it allows water to infiltrate. And we say infiltrate, that's just letting water soak into the ground. So when it soaks into the ground, you see here on this graph, the roots can take up the subsurface nitrogen and phosphorus and take out a lot of our nutrients that are making its way into our waterways. And all of the other vegetation, as they're filtering, they're taking out pollutants, they're eating them up, they're holding them back, and we're just keeping them out of our streams. And another key, this is more of an ecological function, is that they provide shade. Streams are very sensitive to temperature increases. If you look at this picture on the bottom, if we did nothing but just go down and cut down those tall canopy trees and exposed a normally shaded stream system to sunlight, especially a day like today is a little over 100 degrees, and that sun just heats up that stream, we can completely kill that stream off. All of the biodiversity and the fish and all the other critters that are living in the stream just by exposing it to sunlight. And that's even a few degrees can have tremendous impacts. And we also provide food and cover for wildlife and aquatic organisms. As communities continue to develop, we're ensuring that we're leaving something there for wildlife habitat, so that we will have something in place for wildlife and other organisms to live. And key is that they protect channel banks from scour and erosion. This is the most important in terms of the quite possibly ecological but economic impacts, because as these channels erode, they're dumping more and more sediment into our systems, and it causes a lot of problems that we'll talk about here in a minute. But when you're looking at the root systems, the root balls for all of these shrubs and trees and things, they hold soil together like a glove. And if we take those things out, then we have very unstable stream channels. And riparian vegetation is the major source of energy and nutrients for stream communities. Think about what streams feed off of. Well, the streams utilize the food web. And what starts at the bottom of the food web is the bugs, the benthic macroinvertebrates, the crayfish, the mayflies, the stoneflies. All of those eventually get fed upon by higher species within the food chain. But where do the lowest species get their food from? They get it from the leaves and the twigs and the sticks that fall off of our vegetated stream buffers. And if we take away the stream buffers, then we take away the food at the very bottom of the chain, and then that starts to kill off all the organisms as we work our way up. And that's one distinction that a lot of people miss, is that we're taking the food away from the stream when we take away a stream buffer. And riparian vegetation slows floodwaters and helping maintain stable stream banks and protects downstream property. They hold floodplains in place, and that protects downstream property owners during flood events. This picture right here is taken on the Chattahoochee River after the 2009 floods. In September 2009, we had a 500-year flood. This picture taken afterwards, you couldn't even tell, because the vegetative buffer was able to hold everything in place and maintain that floodplain. Also improves aesthetics. You know, what would you rather look at? The picture on, I guess, your left is that's an intermittent stream that was completely denuded of vegetation, and compare that to the picture on the right, where we have a nice forested buffer. to me, I think that the vegetative buffer provides a lot better aesthetics and provides value to that property. Also reduces construction noise. That could be true of any buffer, but trees themselves, when you have neighboring properties, noise coming off those properties can be decreased dramatically by having just a buffer of trees. The same as a soundproofing wall may work on a highway, trees have the same function, and they can help buffer not only views to other properties, but also sound. So what happens when a stream buffer is removed? We have that reduced water quality. We have the increased temperatures and dissolved oxygen, like on this. This probably is a perennial stream. When I took this picture, there were fish swimming around in it. And we lose all the shade, we dump a bunch of sediment in it, and results in loss of habitat. We have increased sediment loading, which sediment in the streams, while at small amounts, is not generally bad, but large amounts can be very bad for the system because look from the picture on the bottom, that sediment getting into the stream. Fish, for example, have very specific habitat for where they can spawn, and mud typically isn't the habitat that they spawn in. And mud or sediment or over-sedimentation will also kill eggs, won't let oxygen get to the fish eggs, and has lower reproductive successes. And grass is not a sufficient vegetative buffer. I see pictures like this all the time, where at one point the buffer was completely cut down and grass planted all the way down to the edge. If you look at that amount of erosion, every time it rains, that property is going farther and farther back. And I get calls all the time about people that call me and say they're losing their backyards. They're afraid that the creek is going to eventually come out and eat out their foundation, because every time it rains, there's nothing there to protect it. There's no protection of the stream banks. So every time it rains, more and more sediment gets dumped into the system and property is lost. And that's because the root systems of grass just aren't enough to protect or hold together a channel like that. And eroded sediment clogs all of the sediment that came off of this land. That stream is going to go underneath a culvert somewhere. It's going to go underneath a bridge. Smaller streams have little pipes that they go through. And all that sediment eventually is going to deposit on the bottom and typically inside these culverts or conveyance structures. When they do that, the structure no longer has the ability to pass stormwater. So after heavy rain, where we had a 24-inch diameter pipe, if it's half full of sediment, then it can't convey the water that it's supposed to. And now that road, instead of just passing water underneath it, it's now actually a dam, because there's not enough conveyance going underneath it. And it results in localized flooding. And the cost associated with cleaning out these culverts is astronomical. It's much easier to keep sediment at the source than it is to clean out the stormwater conveyance pipes or dredge out reservoirs, small ponds. Dredging projects are extremely costly, and what we have to do is keep sediment at its source instead of trying to clean it out once it's already been eroded and then eventually deposited. It also decreases reservoir storage capacity, which is huge in days of water crisis. We have to keep the sediment. Every ounce of sediment that goes into a reservoir is an ounce of water that it can't store. So we have to keep that in mind in terms of water storage, water capacity, when we're thinking about stream buffers and general erosion and sediment control. Now looking here, now say you're a property owner on this lake. 96-acre lake, looks beautiful, but if we didn't have stream buffer ordinances upstream, the amount of sediment that would come into the lake would be tremendously higher than if we didn't have protected stream buffers. And this even with buffers. After an inch and a half of rain, we can get significant amounts of sediment. So it's crucial that we, when making management decisions, keep in mind that sediment is the state's #1 pollutant. No other pollutant causes more problems than sediment getting into our waterways. And one of the biggest sources is coming off of in-stream channel erosion. And buffers do the #1 thing to prevent the amount of sediments getting into our waters. And think about recreational opportunities. If you tore down a buffer in one particular yard, is it going to do that to the Chattahoochee River? No. But if we eliminate buffers regionally, or if we don't enforce the ordinance and have good policies enacted, then yeah, that could be a real possibility. So it's important to also think about recreation when we're thinking about stream buffers and other environmental regulations. I've got a 3.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. When they're old enough, I want to be able to take them out on that river and catch a trout in nice clean water. And that's what it's all about. So finding good balance between environmental regulation, economic development, while still protecting our natural resources. I don't put questions on there, but I don't know if we're in Q&A yet.
Thank you very much, Jason. Moving to the next portion, so let's cue this back up here. We're going to move into the Q&A portion now. So what we'd like to do is, in a mindful manner of understanding that we have many folks here tonight, which is great. We do want to offer, first of all, I want to bring a couple more people forward. First, I'd like to introduce David Ellis. David, come on up. David's with the Atlanta Home Builders. Thanks for joining us. And I also want to introduce Dell MacGregor. If you want to just introduce yourself real briefly. David, if you just say hello, who you are, and your organization.
Sure, my name is David Ellis. I'm the executive director of a local group called the Greater Atlanta Home Builders Association. We work with the housing and construction industry here in the Greater Atlanta area. We have about 900 member companies, and again, we work to try to create a great built environment.
And then Dell MacGregor, please.
I'm Dell MacGregor, and I'm a member, one of 5 members of the DeKalb County Soil and Water Conservation District. We're a state agency, but we are volunteers in that role. There are 40 districts in the state of Georgia. There are 7 in the metro area of their single county districts. Our job falls in between what Jason is talking about. Our goal is to promote and help the stream buffers role in terms of the natural resources of DeKalb County. Frank has given you the law that governs the protection of the stream buffers. Our job is to help you as citizens and help the local issuing authorities, Dunwoody and Lithonia and others, to make sure that you understand the laws that you have on the books and how important they are, therefore to make sure that they're being enforced. So our role is to listen to you all as citizens. If you have a concern, call us and we'll get you to the right person, to help solve the problem. But it's protection of the natural resources that is our mission.
So I'm going to put you all on the spot right now, but I know you don't have an extra slide, but I was new to the whole stream buffer issue. But if one of you could, if I could start off with the first question, talk about the different agencies, the state level, the county level. Where does it all kind of interplay within the different organizations? Would one of you like to kind of address that?
I'll give it a shot. There's several different ordinances at play. One is the Metro North Georgia Water Planning District ordinance, and one is the State Waters Buffer ordinance that stems from the Erosion Sediment Control ordinance. Dunwoody is a local government that is essentially regulated by several state agencies in this regard. As far as the State Waters Buffer, or the State Waters Erosion Sediment Control law, Dunwoody has adopted the model ordinance that the state has promulgated for erosion and sediment control. And we have applied for and become a local issuing authority, which essentially means that the state has transferred its authority to Dunwoody to enforce essentially the local equivalent of the state law. And so our development inspectors will, and our plan reviewers will make sure, actually not our plan reviewers, and I'll get to that in a second, but our development inspectors will make sure that erosion and sediment control plans are implemented in the field by the development community. The Soil and Water Conservation District is tasked with regulating the local issuing authorities, making sure that they are doing their job. And so Dell's group is essentially charged with oversight. They're in an oversight role. They have the ability to give us what's called a memorandum of agreement for plan review. Dunwoody currently does not have that. The Soil and Water Conservation Commission is responsible for reviewing all of the developers' plans, erosion control plans, that are associated with any land disturbance permit application that comes in. Soil and Water Conservation District has a monthly meeting. Dunwoody and the other local issuing authorities in DeKalb County, including unincorporated DeKalb County, typically come to that meeting, and we discuss the developments that are going on in our jurisdictions, and we talk about the number of inspections that we've performed and whatnot. So that's how our relationship with Soil and Water works. Frank's group at EPD was responsible for issuing or giving Dunwoody its local issuing authority status, that's something that Dunwoody applied for. We had to have certain criteria in place in order to qualify for that. In the absence of that, EPD is responsible for doing all of the erosion control inspections in the city. And so it's essentially, it's their, the ability to transfer that to the city gives the city more local control over its land development process, and it gives EPD the ability to stretch some scarce resources that they have. So with that, is there anything else that you guys would explain? All right.
Yeah, we're going to open it up. So, yeah, if we can open this up to Q&A. So it's just, this is not like a city council meeting. We just want to, if you have something to ask, just may have a question, and we can stay here, and just go ahead. Sorry.
Tom, you might want to take it
Yeah.
to make it more formal, but we won't be able to.
Does this one work?
Oh, does this one work? All right, we'll do this. My question is this, and this is directed to Mr. Edinger, because you're the engineer who reviews the plans. If I'm going to do an addition for a homeowner, and it doesn't require a stream buffer variance, I have to have a land disturbance plan. I have to have a survey showing the topography and the trees on the lot. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We have a plan review process that is not necessarily an erosion control review, because the erosion control review only comes into play when you're disturbing an acre or more of land. But Dunwoody still requires a land disturbance permit for land disturbance less than an acre in order to verify that drainage is well catered for on the lot, that the zoning is, that there's not a violation of the zoning code, that the tree ordinance is being enforced, and so on.
Okay, so if it's less than an acre, I'm putting an addition on it, which refers to most of the lots here in Dunwoody, I would have to have that plan.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and then secondly, if there is a stream involved, I'm sure I have to have the same plans, and the homeowner or the contractor both come before the zoning board of appeals, and they get a variance to build within a certain limitation of that stream bank buffer. Does the city, as an issuing authority, have the final say on that, or do all these have to go to the 30-day process and go in front of the state commission to be finally approved before they can actually be built?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what's important is to remember that the two processes are separate. The Zoning Board of Appeals is responsible for adjudicating city stream buffer variance applications. The city does not have the ability to grant a variance from the state waters buffer. That process has to go to EPD, and they have their own process that they go through to issue variances. And so the city is part of that process in that we will go out and we will look at a stream and we will make a determination as to whether it is state waters, whether what you're proposing is it's either an exempt activity or it's not. If it's not an exempt activity and there is encroachment, then you would have to go to EPD for a variance, and we would give you a letter that verifies that yes, we have been out there, we have looked at the stream, it is state waters, there's an encroachment, and it requires a variance. And then you would take that and you would complete your variance application with EPD, and they would go through their process.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Bobby Sedan. I just wanted to ask Jason, what's your opinion about a 25-foot versus a 75-foot buffer?
Well, the state mandated 25-foot buffer is not a scientifically based number. It's a negotiated number. So while a 25-foot buffer is certainly better than nothing, it's not nearly as effective as a 75-foot buffer is. And even a 75-foot buffer, that could be extended. Other local governments have longer than a 75-foot buffer because depending on the topography, if you have a flat, 25-foot buffer, that's different than if it's at a 3-to-1 slope because the water's traveling much faster and it's not going to be nearly as effective. So a 25-foot buffer does provide a lot of the functions like holding the stream bank in place and providing the shade, but they're not very good at filtering. So you get that filtration of taking the pollutants out when you extend, and that's why we like to extend them as far as we can, because the longer it is, the better filtration that you actually have. So that would be.
And can you tell me about requirements for buffers? You pointed out that grass just doesn't do it. So what do you think, what would you recommend would be the best kind of vegetation for a buffer?
Well, whatever naturally forested is naturally there, which isn't always the case. But if you do have a naturally forested system, the best thing to do is just leave it alone. Trees. Trees, shrubs, natural mixture of different native species. But some cases it may be overgrown with invasives, or it may have been previously disturbed before any of these ordinances came into place. And there are ways that you can revegetate a buffer to try to bring it back to life.
Thank you.
So, I've actually got a two-part question here. The first part is, it sounds like we've had something like 23 variance requests over the last 3 years, so that's about 8 a year. How many of those have been granted? And how many of those wouldn't have been necessary if we had followed the model ordinance? In other words, how many of those 23 were only the result of the fact that the last 25 feet are slightly more restrictive than what the model regional ordinances?
Yeah.
Remember that part.
Right.
That's same question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like you said, there's been 23 variance requests. I think 2 have been denied, if I remember right. 2 have been denied. Maybe 18 have been granted, and there may be one that's still pending. And then as far as how many would not have been required because they perhaps were ephemeral streams, I don't have that information because I haven't been looking at whether it's an ephemeral stream, because the current definition of stream is pretty expansive and covers all that, so we really haven't been keeping that data. There have been, I can tell you, there have been several where we've looked at them and said, you know, if this were not, if our definition read differently, you know, this would not be considered a stream. So,
How about the back end? How about the 50 to 75 feet non-impervious versus undisturbed?
yeah, can you restate your question, the second part of the question again?
So, as I understand it, there are two differences in the Dunwoody ordinance between the model ordinance and what we have today. One is the definition of stream. That
Right.
means that we're enforcing a buffer on ephemeral streams. The other is that the model ordinance allows some activity between 50 feet and 75 feet, and we do not.
That's
And
correct.
so the first was how much of the activity that's coming before the ZBA is in that 50 to 75 feet area versus how much is because this drainage ditch is being classified as a stream and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and that's a good question too. I don't have the precise numbers on that again. However, I'll tell you that the model ordinance, that 25-foot setback, is essentially a no impervious surface setback. So if you wanted to encroach on it, you know, you could do so if you were, say you wanted to cut down the buffer and just put grass there. Grass is a pervious surface, and so you could do that, and you wouldn't need to get a variance for that in the model ordinance. Most people, when they come in for a variance request, it's because they want to put something there that's impervious, and so probably, you know, most of the variance requests that are in that zone are variance requests, you know, that